call the regular session of EWEB to order. We have an agenda check. Seeing no changes, I will move on to items from board members and general manager. And let's start here with John Brown.
Not really too much. I attended the Northeast Neighborhood meeting with Frank. Did an excellent job of presenting. Eugene was
Fossil free Eugene.
Fossil free Eugene. And did that. And then I just like to compliment EWEB as a whole organization. The city's had downtown torn up for almost a year. It's been a disaster for people down there. But when I see EWEB crews and compare them to the other crews, professionalism, the way they do things, that they're putting on the trucks, light years ahead of everybody else. I just like to make sure that those people know that it stands out, and it's a difference. You just sit there and look at the difference between the EWEB crew and I won't bash any other crews, but they're just light years ahead in every aspect of the construction projects, and so kind of makes you feel good to know that you're part of that organization. So that's all my commendation. Thank you.
I just wanted to note that the EWEB Run to Stay Warm is coming up on the 19th, I believe.
I attended the Mackenzie Watershed Council meeting last month. There's another one this Thursday. It's at the International Paper headquarters building in Springfield. Progress is being made on Quartz Creek Stage 0 reclamation. They built the bridge. They had to replace a bridge up there in order for it to be able to go wide enough. That bridge has been put in and it's driving across. So the work between the council and the trust is moving that project forward. Finrock, they finished stage 3, I believe. So that's really good. They did a bunch of work this summer. They completed the majority of that project up there, and they are seeing a whole bunch of reds. They used to have just a handful that are 50 or 60 in an area. They used to have 4 or 5. So things are working up. Part of thanks to EWEB and our other partners.
I had a lot of fun presenting to the poster winners at O'Hara.
Oh, yes.
Fun.
Yeah, I got to do that as well, and I think Sonia did too.
There's another thing.
I don't think I have anything.
I want to take a quick jump back and just do the facility and safety awareness. Shorten that time. All right, thank you for attending this evening's board meeting. EWEB management and subject matter experts are here with us in the room and virtually during tonight's presentations. Remote presenters will appear on the screen. Please make sure to speak loudly and clearly so everyone can hear you. Guests are invited to sign up at the table at the back of the room if they wish to provide public testimony. Visitor access is limited to the board meeting room and the restrooms. The restrooms are located on the first floor through this room, or through this door right here. In case of an emergency, such as a fire alarm, exit through the glass door at the back of the room unless it is not safe to do so. The alternate emergency exit is located at the rear of the building, just beyond the restrooms, through that door. During evacuation, follow staff's instructions and stay together for safety. Tonight's meeting is being recorded. The recording began when the meeting was called to order and will continue until adjournment. If there is a break during the meeting, the room will be muted. Aside from that period, virtual participants on the screen and the public audience will be able to hear conversations in the room until the meeting is disconnected. Put that aside, and we will jump on to the next item, which is an update from John Borofsky and Frank and I on the City of Eugene Liaison. So I have plan on kind of quickly going through some of the items. We mostly did an update to the city staff on what we're doing with EWEB. We covered topics such as the headquarters building purchase, City of Eugene, or billing for the City of Eugene, the EWEB climate guidebook, the Hilliard water treatment transmission line, College Hill, the secondary water source, coordinating with the city on the upcoming water transmission line between Riverfront Park Crossing and Knickerbocker Bridge, and then 2024 rates forecast. Covered any other thoughts or comments that you wanted?
I think it was just really a positive meeting. The overall vibe of the room, it was the mayor and council presidents, which is Randy Groves this time, city manager Sarah Maderi, Frank, and us, and it was just a good, we got to let them know where we were on a lot of things that may impact their things, and they asked some really good questions, and we learned a lot. We learned about little marks on fire hydrants that we didn't know about from Randy Groves. But I think overall, it was a very positive thing, and I think it's something that they want to move forward in the future. I think they see the value that we bring to both leaderships.
A couple things just to add. We did stress to them the importance of keeping the public facilities services plan progressing. City of Eugene, City of Springfield, and Lane County. And that's a little bit behind schedule, and so anything that can be done to help keep that moving was our request to them. That's important for our work with the alternative water source. They talked a little bit about some of their budget constraints. I know they may approach EWEB again on potential billing mechanisms for some of their fees. If that occurs, then I will work with the board on any request that comes to that, comes in that form. And there was some discussion around fire hydrants and the fact that in many cases, and I know we've had some interest in actually owning the fire hydrants. Most water utilities do own the fire hydrants. We do not here. I suspect that we'll resurrect some of those discussions with the city. So there's reasons that water utilities like to do that. First of all, when you're testing fire hydrants, a lot of times that can be very disruptive to the actual water lines and water infrastructure itself. So there's some reasons that we have an interest in that as well, and we know the city does. So I think it's a matter of if we can come to terms with the city on that. So that's the only thing I would add, President Carlson.
Questions or thoughts or comments for All right, well then we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is correspondence.
Yep, President Carlson. By the way, the one thing I did want to mention on the last subject relative to the city, I just wanted to let commissioners know that at a management and staff level, the city and EWEB are working really well together. There's a number of things that we coordinate on and we rely on each other for, and City Manager Maderi and her staff have been great partners for EWEB and our staff. So I want to thank the EWEB staff who helped make that happen, and also the city staff. And that just became very apparent, and it was, I think, part of the positiveness of the meeting that we had. So I forgot to mention that, and that's probably the most important thing I could have mentioned. But thanks to everybody for making that happen.
I think that was what you opened with in the meeting. And that it was perfect to set it up as well as the stage.
I did, and I forgot it now, so it was my fault. You had 3 pieces of correspondence. The first one was less about positional and actions, and it was really more of a follow-up for commissioners from when Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or SMUD, presented some of their products and services, in particular around energy efficiency, we wanted to go through as part of that and do some comparison and contrasts with some of the work that we do. There were some areas that we do that they don't. There's some areas that they do that we don't. There's certainly some opportunities that we see going forward. There's even in that where we have certain planned work going ahead. That was more informational than it was a request of the board, but I wanted to compliment Julie McGahee, Anna Wade, and Jen Connors for putting together that format, because I thought it was really a useful way of getting a reasonable benchmark and some detail in that benchmark. And so I really thank them. The second piece was a recognition that we do have, and we will bring to the board in December, the legislative position and update agenda for this next year. It is a short session in Salem. I know Jason is on the line. We don't expect a lot out of a short session, but we're in the midst of some rulemaking, which always takes place. And he identified in his sort of pre-memo for next month some areas that we're keeping track of. And then the third one was a follow-up to commissioners when I believe it was Commissioner Borofsky was asking about some of our process relative to how we go out for bids. And so Deborah Hart and Quentin Furrow put together some of the history around how we do different types of bids, whether that's a bid or a proposal, what the thresholds are, what the regulatory requirements are, and that that was an informational item as a sort of I'll say it's a voluntary follow-up. I don't know that the board asked for that, but it was certainly one that we noticed and thought it would be useful. All of the people who put together these correspondence items, I believe, are available. If commissioners had comments or questions, I would be happy to deflect those to the right people who are probably in attendance.
I just want to say a big thank you for that document was really great. I know when they came in and gave us that presentation with all the great things that they're doing and made us start questioning, like, why aren't we doing this? But having those side-by-side comparisons I thought was really helpful. Just to see what we are doing, areas where we're planning on doing things. And I was surprised to see that our product suite for our retail revenue that we invest in is more percentage-wise than what they do. So, anyway, thank you very much for that report. It was very easy to read and helpful.
Thanks for all of the reports. The question I had, this may go back to predate my time on the board, but in Jason's report, he talked about the federal limit power generation deauthorization study. The fact that there's 13 dams on the Willamette that don't put a lot of power out. And it says that we've been partnering with the PPC for that. Was that a board decision to do that? And if that was the case, that was before my time, I'd like to learn a little bit more about that decision by us to back that. I mean, and this is just anecdotal stuff, but I mean, I'm seeing stuff that's going on with drawing downs of dams. You know, Foster Lake, when is a mud pit right now because of Green Peter, fish dies. Lookout Point, you know, there's more to a dam than just the power that it generates. And so by us advocating for that, I don't know if that was a prior board decision to do that, and if it was so, is that something that we may want to revisit?
I'd be happy. It was not a prior board decision, and the deauthorization doesn't have much to do with how the dams are actually operated. For quite a number of years, I think the Public Power Council, of which we're a member, and they, as a group of utilities, have taken a position that one of two things should probably happen. Because these are multi-purpose dams, they have flood control, for example, as one of the other purposes. We've felt for quite some time that too many of the ongoing operating costs and capital costs are assigned to power customers as opposed to general purpose, for its general purpose use. And so some of this is around how those costs are allocated. And that's been the big position that we've taken, is those are, you're assigning costs in a very regressive way that appear on people's utility bills as opposed to using other mechanisms such as appropriations to pay for that. The other side of that is when, because of those cost allocations, these dams from a power generating perspective and a cost for levelized cost of energy is really the worst in the fleet. And so the other option, which we've been supportive of as well, has been at that level of cost that their continued part of the Bonneville fleet should be considered and potentially removed. So, and that I don't believe historically ever came to the board. I think that was a PPC recommendation, and we were supportive of that recommendation as one of, I don't remember how many PPC members there are, but it was really around the cost allocation and the cost that we're driving.
So, and I'm just going to, one quick question then. So if it's a core dam that is generating power, and they decide, okay, it's just too expensive to generate power, and for the reasons that you just stated, do they need to go through FERC and do all the delicensing and that type of thing that it costs them?
I do not believe that they're FERC jurisdictional, but Jason, I'll weigh into this a little bit with Jason, but I don't believe they are. They're regulated differently. Okay, I mean, because they're regulated. They're
like, if we say we want to stop generating power at Lieberg, it's going to cost us $200 million. If they say they don't want to generate power at Dexter, it doesn't.
Now there would be costs associated with decommissioning. However, because they're multi-purpose dams, the dam itself and that part of the infrastructure would probably still remain. The cost would then get transferred to some type of governmental appropriations process. Jason, did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct, Frank. They're not FERC licensed dams. Also, you're also correct that to the extent power users were no longer paying their disproportionately large cost share for the operations and maintenance, as well as the upgrades for fish and wildlife impact mitigations, that those funds would be recovered through the federal appropriations process, the federal budget, and the taxpayers instead of power users. And maybe one other thing of note, technically it is still on the table that the study could propose a different cost share for power users. So it is not completely off the table that power generation would continue, but the cost share could be reduced. And it could even be dam specific. It doesn't have to be all the generating dams in the system, all or nothing. They can make determinations for each individuual power generating dam in the Willamette system. I think it's at least six of the 13, maybe one or two more, but they can make individual determinations at each dam. Some dams they could deauthorize generation, other dams they may keep generation, but reconsider the cost share to power generation.
And this is federal lobbying, not state then, right?
Federal.
Right. Did you get your questions answered?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that was definitely part of the conversation that we had when we went back to lobby the congressional delegation. And it was the last time I went 4 years ago. So we'll probably continue being on there for some time. I had a couple of comments about the correspondence as well. I also appreciated the SMUD comparison that staff did, although there's a slightly different view on it because I felt like a little bit of a wet blanket last time, and so I felt somewhat justified. Anyway, thank you for doing it. I mean, it goes to show that UWEB is doing a lot already. We're at plus 90%, and we've earned it through a lot of years, and so I appreciate that look and that confirmation that we're doing the right thing as a whole to make sure that we're doing conservation and reduction to the most that we can. So,
President Carlson, could I just inject one thing? I do want to note that what I think this shows is there are opportunities still out there. And what it really doesn't show, which we're going to try to put a certain amount of attention into our year-end report, it says what we're doing, but it doesn't say fully what those results are. And so as part of our year-end reporting, we want to really report out on these programs and what's their result? Do we feel they're successful or not? So it doesn't really say how we think we're doing with those, although I think we're doing well in some areas. I think there's other areas we probably look to see opportunities. So this kind of said what we're doing is kind of interesting side by side, but it doesn't answer the full question, and there'll be more to come on that.
excellent, love it. Continuous improvement. One thing that did come out of it for me, I noticed on our report of our incentives for windows and water heaters, that the incentive was actually smaller for the rental, or the rental occupied versus the owner occupied. It was $20 for an owner occupied versus $10 for renter occupied, and for the window per pane, and then it was $1,700 versus $1,000 for the water heater incentives. And I was just curious why there was a difference there, what the thoughts are. And if you don't have that now, I just maybe later. But.
I don't have that now, but I don't know if Anna or Julie would want to weigh in on that. We can follow up if need to. I don't have that off the top of my head, but Anna or Julie?
Yeah, sure. So there's not going to be a super straightforward answer to that. As we've talked to you in the past, we have a myriad of different kind of guideposts that we evaluate when we are assessing what our incentive amounts are. We have raised several of our limited income measures this year fairly recently. When it comes to windows, we want to be mindful about incentivizing capital upgrades. Because this is an asset that is owned by an individual, that owns the real estate. So we really try to focus our most generous incentives on areas where we see the greatest amount of conservation and we see the greatest impact to comfort at home. And so that's why ductless heat pumps, that's something that has a very positive impact for the renter. It does improve the home for the landlord as well. Windows can be really helpful, but really we just don't see the kind of savings out of windows measures as we do for some of our others. Insulation is a great one. That's one where we feel that there really isn't an outsized kind of equity outcome when we apply those funds, but it really does have a huge impact for the tenants that are living there. So we really try to strike a balance between, what is the ultimate impact? What are we subsidizing? Where does the value lie?
Thank you. Yeah, it only struck me because I know that this board has put out there a number of times that we wanted to really work on the rental pool because there's that disconnect between the owner and the occupant and who pays. And so I appreciate the thinking behind it there. Oh yeah, Chuck.
Could I just ask a question for future answer? Could somebody explain to me how conservation is different if it's owned by somebody versus rented by somebody? Isn't conservation? So if we put a window in a rental unit versus an owner-occupied unit, what's the difference? So I'll just put that out there for food of thought because I would like to see us incentivize it. I don't care if they rent it or own it. We're going to conserve utility consumption by installing it. So would hope we could have some equity there. But that's for another conversation.
Okay. And I'm just going to throw out there, if we had somebody that was getting the incentive that owned 20 units and they lived in California, for example, is that the same level of equity versus providing that to current residents? And it may or may not be. That's exactly why I asked the question. So as we contemplate that, let's think about that aspect too. Okay, and then the last question I had on correspondence was on the procurement process. And I know that a number of years ago, we were lobbying and saying that. So it's kind of the legislative policy and the procurement process. There was discussion about the QBS process, and that was kind of hanging us up. And I just, while we had Jason here, did that get fixed, that issue? Did the challenge that we were having, that we were lobbying on, or is that still out there as a challenge for our procurement process?
Just a moment, I'm moving from the basement back to a presentable spot. Commissioner, the QBS was addressed, I think, gosh, I want to say in the 2019 session. And as I recall, we didn't get a total win, but there was a compromise where we were allowed to consider price in a limited way. So the QBS, some of the fundamentals of what people like about qualification-based selection remain in place, but we were able to give some weight to price. I'd have to go back and look at my notes to give you details. So I hope this answer will suffice. We did get partial relief in our ability to be stewards of the bottom line and get value in the QBS process, but some of the architecture of QBS remains in place. It probably ended up really as a pretty good compromise, and I can definitely follow up maybe in the next board run if you want a more detailed recap of what relief we received in the 2019 session.
It's not too much trouble, but if not, it's fine. Thank you. Okay, that's what I had in correspondence. Anybody else? Okay. Then we'll move on to the next, which I believe is public input, and we're a little bit ahead at 6:55, but let's start the process, and if we have others that join that want to attend, we can come back to it at 6:55. So I'm going to read the public input piece here. So the board values relevant community input from diverse perspectives and requests that all persons share their views and opinions in a manner that is productive, respectful, and not disruptive. Speech of any kind that is disruptive will not be tolerated. Anyone who fails to meet the standard may be muted or removed from this meeting. When your name is called in person, speakers are invited to stand at or sit next to the table. Clearly state your name and optionally your address or ward. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present their testimony. Please keep track of time. In-person speakers can watch the timer at the front of the room. All speakers can listen for an audio notification when your time has lapsed. And we do not have anybody participating by telephone. Okay, we'll skip that part. After all testimony is heard, each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose, although by policy we do not engage in a back and forth dialogue. Please note that a failure of a commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. The board may request staff to respond to specific questions or comments posed by the public. Those responses, which are for the public good, may be posted on EWEB's website. And we have, I will note that we had one person signed up to speak in person, and then we also had 5 written testimony that was submitted and provided to the board. So I will call up Curtis Blankenship to the table. And feel free to stand or sit at your...
Hi, I'm Curtis Blankenship, Springfield, Oregon. I used to own 10 acres out here on Lorraine Highway a long time ago. Been a LEED certified designer since 2002. and have studied sustainable design basically since I was 18 years old and experimented with it here. So what I want to talk about is rooftop solar. There's a book by Buckminster Fuller called Critical Path. In there, there's a diagram that shows all the matter that has been on the Earth as a little dot, and then all the matter that the Earth is made of, and then all the matter that has ever been on Earth is this giant circle right next to it. And what's missing from this equation is sunlight. So that is where all your energy is coming from. So I don't feel that you guys are doing due diligence enough in exploring rooftop solar. And especially I just was coming from the forum at the U of O here, where they're just not even looking at rooftop solar, and they're telling me, what they're telling me is that there isn't enough, it drops drastically in the winter. But there's plenty of ways to supplement that. You're just talking about hydroelectric, but also, you know, they're right at the cutting edge of thermoelectric generator technology. You could take the waste heat from those buildings and put a thermoelectric tiles on there during the winter when you're trying to gain that extra amount of energy. But better still, you have all these parking lots and all these. I used to work grocery for 12 years. The refrigeration alone in these grocery stores, as you know, takes a huge amount of energy. You have all these parking lots that are creating a heat island effect. Put covered parking lots on there and get more solar panels that way. Here's a radical idea for you. I went to New York Institute in Massachusetts back in '94, and this lady had a greenhouse that was heated with Angora rabbits, okay, because Angora rabbits have a 108-degree body temperature. This is how far you could think outside of the box. Let's have animal husbandry to supplement your solar heat, and let's see the U of O create an Angora sweater, bring back the Angora sweater. We can have yellow and green Angora sweaters and save the climate and the world at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time, and I know that you came early for the meeting and had to sit through the executive session, so thank you for waiting all that time to provide your testimony.
Thanks.
Okay, any other comments from commissioners? Okay. So Ann, you let me know if somebody else joins at 6:55. Signs up. Otherwise, we will, I'll close the public hearing, but I can reopen another one. So closing the public hearing. If anybody else signs up, we'll open it back up. Next up, we have the approval of consent calendar. Consent calendar A. Does anybody want to pull anything from the consent calendar?
Move to adopt consent calendar A.
Second.
Okay. Any comments? Discussion? No. All right. All those in favor of consent calendar A, raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Next up, we have consent calendar B. Does anybody want to pull consent calendar, anything from consent calendar B?
Move to adopt consent calendar B.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? None. All right, any opposed? No, all right, we all passed unanimously.
Wow.
All right. We will move on to the upcoming year proposed budgets and prices. Ready?
I think so.
Okay, take it away.
All right, well, good evening, President Carlson and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Deborah Harden. I'm the CFO. With me are Aaron Ballmer, the Interim Finance Manager, and Alicia Voorhees, the Budget and Rate Supervisor. Also here in the audience are Janice Lee, Daniel Davidson, and Adam Rue, who were all part of the team who helped put this together and would also be available for questions. So on the screen behind me is an overview of the stages of the financial planning calendar. We are in November, very much in the midst of the process. Last month, we reviewed the updated long-term financial plans and sought direction from the board on the 2024 draft budgets. This month, we're here with a detailed draft budget document along with refined price proposals that include impacts to each of the customer classes. Following direction this evening, we will be incorporating any feedback and returning next month to seek board action on the 2024 budgets and price proposals. There are a few opportunities for public hearings at several points along the way, one of which is on the agenda for this evening following the presentation. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Aaron.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, commissioners. All right, so board policy establishes that each utility shall have an operations and maintenance, otherwise known as O&M, and a capital budget. Each budget is the maximum level of expenditure authorized by the board in the planning process. On the slide is a grid representative of these 4 budget areas. Figures noted on the screen correspond to line items for totals in attachment 1 of the 2024 proposed budget document. So rather than inundating you with numbers, I'm hoping to highlight a few of the initiatives, priorities, and projects incorporated in the proposed budgets. The water O&M budget reflects ongoing services to provide clean, healthy water through operations at Hayden Bridge and regular maintenance of the distribution system. It supports initiatives in drinking water source protection, including continued watershed recovery efforts following the Holiday Farm Fire. The budget also continues efforts to promote public awareness and stewardship of a healthy watershed through the targeted actions and programs, including the Water Quality Monitoring Program. There are efforts to update the Water System Master Plan that are also supported through the 2024 budgets. This required update will serve as a roadmap for developing future water system capital improvement plans, as well as reinforce the foundation for safety and reliability of the water system for decades to come. EWEB's commitment to affordability is also supported through bill assistance programs such as customer care, and we continue to offer comprehensive water efficiency programs along with voluntary programs to help customers finance projects that benefit the environment. The 2024 water capital budget reflects upgrades to drinking water storage tanks at College Hill and Shasta, and also includes work to install distribution and transmission mains, including pipes needed to connect the East 40th storage project. The 24 budget includes planning to build a water treatment plant on the Willamette River to improve the resiliency of our water supply. And there are ongoing investments to upgrade meter technology to improve service, as well as efforts to upgrade our legacy IT systems, with season 1 of EWEB Enterprise Solutions slated to go live in the 4th quarter of next year. A final highlight to the 24 water capital budget is noting the Bertelsen expansion project, which will provide a flexible, adaptable space for current and future storage and operational needs. Switching to the electric slide here, the electric O&M budget includes funding for purchase power costs, including rising costs of power supplied by Bonneville Power Administration. This supports broad community services through contributions in lieu of tax payments made to both the cities of Eugene and Springfield. And it also supports work to assess our readiness for regional organized energy markets, addressing our approach to energy imbalance markets, extended day-ahead markets, and the Western Resource Adequacy Program. It furthers programs for wildfire safety and prevention, electrification, energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction, as well as supports EWEB's commitment to affordability through bill assistance programs, again, such as customer care. It contains funding to address structural vulnerabilities of the Lieberg Canal and supports continued compliance management efforts related to Public Utility Commission standards and NERC reliability audit preparations. It also includes staff training, both utility-wide and role-specific, to support workforce resiliency and the future skills needed to deliver electric services to the community. The electric capital budget for 2024 supports needed investments to upgrade the Carmen Smith hydroelectric project and rebuilding of substations to increase capacity and improve reliability. Curran is planned to be recommissioned in 2024 with further construction at the Jessen substation and design work beginning for several others. There are underground cable replacements that will increase reliability and help with wildfire prevention. And Leeburg shows up in the capital plan as well for 2024, as there are land improvements necessary for future stormwater conveyance. As with the water system, there are ongoing investments to upgrade meter technology to improve service, as well as efforts to upgrade our legacy IT systems, and also the Bertelsen expansion project, which again will provide a flexible, adaptable space for current and future needs. So planning for 2024 resulted in an overall revenue requirement increase of 7.8% for the water utility and 5.7% for the electric utility. There are distinctions in the overall revenue requirements and pricing impacts among customer classes, as we'll see in just a moment. And in evaluating price proposals for both utilities, increases were applied across billing determinants in order to meet the overall revenue requirement increase. For the electric utility, slight weighting in proposed prices was placed on the basic charge for most customer classes, as the cost of service analysis indicated a higher basic charge necessary to recover the fixed costs of the electric system. Also of note, within the price proposal documents, there are proposed updates including minor changes to policy language for market-based products and the environmental product lines. And with that, I will pass to Alicia to talk further on the presentation.
Thank you, Aaron. In 2021, staff presented a multi-year cost of service analysis, or COSA, based on the projected information at that time. The intent was to employ gradualism for each customer class over a 3-year time horizon. 2024 was year 3 of that analysis. We have since updated assumptions as well as revenue and expense forecasts in both utilities' long-term financial plans. The graphs on this slide list the largest customer classes for each utility and compare the compounded rate increases initially proposed over those 3 years to the rates implemented in 2022 and 23, as well as rates proposed tonight for 2024. The initial analysis is indicated by the softer color bars, and the actual and proposed rates are indicated by the richer colored bars. The gray bars reflect the difference between the two. The graphs include a 3-year historical inflation benchmark on the right, corresponding to the type of service. Water services inflation for the water utility and electric services inflation for the electric utility. The graph on the left shows figures for the water utility. And when the initial 3-year rate trajectory was presented to the board, staff was asked to smooth the rate trajectory to avoid double-digit rate increases. This graph is reflective of those efforts, as indicated by an 8% lower overall revenue requirement. The water districts are approximately 5% of the water utility's overall revenue, and any changes in consumption forecast can cause greater swings, which is what you're seeing here. Both the initial and actual and proposed compounded increases were derived from long-term financial plans that accounted for significant investments in water storage and treatment. The overall revenue requirement, inclusive of these investments, is higher than the water services inflation benchmark. The graph on the right shows figures for the electric utility, with larger customer classes represented as well. Please note, the overall revenue requirement includes contract customers not reflected here. The difference for the larger customer classes between what was initially presented and what was implemented and proposed tonight is due to the additional rate increase in 2024 for pre-funding the labor risk mitigation and decommissioning work. The overall revenue requirement is in line with the initial 3-year cost of service presented. Electric rate increases, inclusive of the 4% Liebberg rate increase in 2024, are lower than the benchmark, reflecting the efforts the utility has made to control costs while still providing essential and reliable services to customers. As this is the final year of the 3-year rate proposal, we will present a new 3-year rate proposal next fall. Next year, we will also begin the work with the board on rate design. To determine rate increases, revenues at current rates are compared to the allocated revenue requirement for each customer class. This slide shows the customer class performance for the water utility. The top row reflects the cost of service analysis results based on the proposed draft 2024 budgets. The bottom row represents the proposed price changes that incorporate the principle of gradualism. For the water utility, price proposals correlate to the results for retail customers, and for wholesale customers, price proposals correspond with the updated results per contract terms. Tables with further detail can be found in the proposal document. Proposed changes for residential and general service are the same, as differences in the cost of service analysis were not distinct enough to merit changes among these retail customer classes. The 2 contract customers with negative revenue requirement had factors that more than offset the overall increased costs. Based on the 2024 sales volume forecast, these customers had a lower share of the overall forecasted sales volume and overall peak excess demand, and therefore received a lower revenue requirement allocation. I'd also like to note the rate base for these contracts incorporate existing plant and service values, as opposed to the retail customer base, which incorporates current year capital spending. In other words, these surplus contract customers don't pay for capital until it is commissioned. We have significant investments in storage that will go into service by the end of this year, which will impact rates for surplus customers next year. For that reason, we are proposing to keep rates flat. Similar to the water utility slide, the figures in the top row reflect cost of service analysis results based on the draft 2024 budgets. Again, the figures in the bottom row represent proposed price changes. Please note that this table does not include contract customers whose rates include allocated expenses from the cost of service analysis. EWEB uses the industry standard of within 5% plus or minus for each non-contract customer class to guide the decision to recommend price adjustments. And as there was not a significant deviation among our general service customer classes, we are proposing rates that smooth impacts among the entire general service category with an eye towards the affordability principle. We are proposing to increase street lighting below the results derived from the cost of service analysis, as well as proposing to maintain current rates for private lighting in anticipation of the need to implement gradualism from the next 3-year cost of service analysis to be completed next year. As this and future years' financial outlook signal rate increases, commitment to affordability is even more critical. The graph on the left-hand side of the slide assesses affordability, showing a comparison of the average water and electric bills for Eugene residential customers and comparators. For EWEB customers, combined electric and water bills equate to 3.5% of median household income. This measure has shown improvement over the past 7 years, indicating increasing affordability for customers. The community has seen an increase in incomes, while utility bills have remained flat for most of the period. Turning to the 2 bar graphs on the right-hand side of the slide for water and electric among comparator utilities. Though these graphs reflect current pricing as of September 2023 and not proposed prices, we expect that other utilities will raise rates this year as well, and have seen news reports that at least one of the comparators is looking to increase rates in 2017. For EWEB, currently, electric leads to the right of the middle of the pack, while water shows headroom on the comparators. The rate increases proposed here tonight would result in $11.10 increase on the electric bill and a $3.09 increase on the water bill. And given the economic pressures facing so many of our customers, we will continue to look for opportunities to control costs and operate efficiently. And with that, I'll give it to you for the public hearing.
Okay, do we have anyone signed up for the public hearing? Okay. And we're already at 7:45. So I'll leave it open. You may need to come back to the public hearing, but go to direction and the other items and come back to the public hearing. So can I open a public hearing and then close it? Or just, okay. I'll open the public hearing. Close the public hearing. And 7:45, if somebody shows up to testify, we'll reopen. Okay. So then we'll go back to then direction and questions from board members. Do you have anything else on direction-wise, questions or?
Go ahead.
I have just a clarifying question. If we go back to the last slide that had water. Yeah, that's it right there. Thank you. Sorry. So we're looking at the average monthly water bill. Can you remind us, does that include the surcharge for watershed restoration? And at what point does that end? Like, what is that? When does that end, and what does that look like in regards to the average bill?
So it was approved for 60 months, and that falls off. And yes, that is in this chart, and I feel like you asked one more question.
So in terms of how it's reflected, it's actually like a fixed charge per meter, isn't it? So it's like $3 or $4 or something. Okay, so we would expect to see that drop off a couple of years down the road. Okay.
Just interject one thing. When we go through in March, we're going to go through and give an update on the state of the watershed report. And as part of that, we will report back to the board where we are in the list of projects that was scheduled to fund. It was scheduled for 60 months. It doesn't mean that the board couldn't rescind it sooner than 60 months. And it is $3 and it is scheduled to come on in 2025. But depending on where we are in the state of those projects, it could be adjusted.
I need to correct that. It's mid-2026.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, just philosophically, I've been doing this for a long time, and we had, it used to be the board that the staff would come and do the budget, and then we'd raise the rates to meet it. And then we decided that we're not going to do it that way anymore. We're going to tell you that we wanted to keep rate increases within inflation. And so and then you would come in and back into it that way. It seems to me we're getting away from that. I know we got a lot of gorillas in the living room, so to speak, but affordability and reliability are my two main points here. And I'm looking where we used to be way over on the left on electric, and now we're inching up there to the big people. And it's concerning because, how do I tell my neighbors they own one of those people, they own Willamette Water Company, it's a private company. And my rates are going up, but theirs aren't. And, water is water. And same thing with, with Anita, that COSA thing is just the optics of, the River Road Water District and all of these private water districts we sell to. We giving them the ability, since we didn't charge them more, that they get to move their rates up and make more of a profit. because everybody else's rates are going up. I mean, I just don't like the optics of my water rate going up 8%, subs are going up 8%, and I think their electric is 3%, but just the fact that some people are getting the rate and others aren't, it's hard for me to explain that to the lay people. So go ahead.
Yeah, I get, the real simple answer is that we're making investments in the infrastructure, and this board and staff have decided to smooth that over a number of years. Those customers do not pay for that until it goes into service, of which if we do a gradual, they will have to pay the piper at some point, and it's not going to be a gradual, it's going to be a step function. So at some point they will, what's that?
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, for example, the water tanks, and in our COSA, we're raising the rates, we'll say 4%, 4%, 4%. When those go into service and that capital hits the contracts, they might be at 0 now. They're going to jump to 12 or 15 at that time. So the big difference with some of those contracts is that we are paying for capital up front while we're doing it, and they don't pay it until it goes into service. And so they will have to pay the piper at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Matt, and then I'll jump in.
Do those customers, that they're selling to that are reselling, are they aware of that jump coming down below?
Yeah.
So the wholesalers are aware of that. How that translates to their customers, I cannot speak to. We've been actively engaged in conversations, particularly around a second treatment facility with the water districts, so that they could understand that as soon as that went into service, they would be looking at a large increase. And it's been a while since I've had those conversations with them. But at one point, they were working on their capital reserves so that they could help manage that.
So will we, I'm sorry to jump in, will we recapture our pre-funding then? Because right now we're raising water rates to pre-fund second source. And so 5 years from now, when we get it up and running, we will have pre-funded it with our rates. So we're going to not only stick them with the cost, but then we're going to go back and recapture what we're pre-funding right now, because our Eugene residents are paying for something that people at Crestwell and Bonita and Cottage Grove, they're benefiting from it because they're getting our water. We will go back and recapture our pre-funding.
Effectively, yes. So when we set their rates, there's a rate of return. When we do this on it, it's called the utility basis as opposed to the cash basis, which is how our customers pay and how they pay for things as we go. So those contract customers, their rates will include a rate of return on those assets that our customers have paid to build, have either pre-funded or paying the debt for while we're building it, and we'll recoup those costs, or the portion that belongs to those contract customers after they go into service.
There is another way of saying that, is that when we're paying for something up front, there's a cost to that financing. And the cost of that financing eventually gets passed on through this rate of return that you're speaking of. Is that another way of saying it?
Mm-hmm.
Slide 16. I think that's the one where it has the 0, the water districts and Willamette Water. So is it different because the city of Bonita has a different contract that allows us to pass that on before the code goes into effect?
That's not what is driving Bonita's rates. So with the water districts, the reason why we're not doing anything is because a very large capital investment is going into service at the end of this year. So that's why we're proposing that we hold those steady, knowing that we're putting into service a large investment, or large investments that we expect will swing their rates upward. But Bonita's rates are going up to Someone can describe it better than me.
They are an interruptible customer, so they have a, so the water districts, we supply them based on their excess demand as well. And they're not an interruptible customer, whereas City of Benita is not allocated in the same methodology as they are. And so because they don't have that peak demand that we allocate costs to them for, it's a different allocation. Sorry if I didn't explain that very well. I don't know, Adam, if you wanted to jump in and explain that.
Sure. Maybe a familiar face. Adam Rue is our new rates manager. He just started and he's reviewed some of this work.
Yeah, so the Benita contract is much lower rate because it is the surplus nature of the contract, so it's interruptible and they're only allocated a portion of the cost. I think that's what Alicia was saying, but they're allocated maybe a much lower portion of the cost. So when there is a cost increase, it creates a higher percentage, even though it's off a lower base, if that makes sense.
And so the water districts and the Willamette Water, they're the ones that were holding off for the source to be put into place, and then once that's active, then they would pay for the, okay. So I didn't realize that City of Benita was in a completely different camp. Okay, that makes sense now. And then I had a couple of just questions on the numbers. I'm just trying to figure out which number is where. So in the summary, it says that it's an average price increase of 7.8. I assume that's across all customer classes, that 7.8 is, because otherwise I'm seeing the residential on some of the slides say like 6.25 and some say others, but that 7.8 is across all of the rate classes. Correct. Okay. And then if you go, so this says residential is proposed at 8.3%. But then in our packet, and this is this is water. Okay, so sorry, go back to the previous slide. One back. Again, the one that's electric. Okay.
This one?
Yes. Okay, so residential, it says is 6.3% here proposed, but then in the table on page 16, okay, it's 6.25. Okay, so that's fine. So then go back to the water. This is between the two water ones. So this says 8.3, but then the one right before it on the water side said 7 point something. 7.4. 7.8. What's the difference between those two? What values are we looking at? What's 7.8 versus the 8 something?
That's the total revenue requirement across all the classes.
Oh, that's the average again.
Yes.
Okay, so if this is average, then on the electric, why does this say 5.7 when in the summary it says 7.8?
The 7.8 should be the water overall revenue requirement.
Okay. Oh, that's that one. Okay, that's where I was like, there's too many different numbers here, and I'm getting lost in them. Okay.
We tried to put fewer in the slides this time.
Okay, so 6.25. So the number that we're looking at raising for residential rates is 6.25. Is that correct? And that's what's on that slide. Yes. So on the 3-year COSA, that doesn't have this same number here, the 6.3. So that was looking across the 3 years and what the change is. Correct. This is only the change for this particular year. Correct. Okay, thank you. I knew it was me. I just needed to go through the steps there and make sure I had my numbers right. So when somebody asks me how much we're raising rates in their residential customer, on the electric side, I say 6.3. Okay, got it. Whew. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, John Borowski.
Yeah, what would a budget be if you didn't read through it?
I saw you making notes,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
I was waiting.
So, okay, we'll start with the notes and then we'll dig into the nitty-gritty. So what I'm taking from this is that we're starting to implement COSA into our rate design. And does that mean that we're going to have a and we're doing that through the basic charge? Is that where we're implementing COSA?
So we're implementing the COSA results across all of the classes in the amount of the increase that they're bearing. But what Alicia had, I think Alicia, maybe Aaron, had mentioned was that the COSA results did indicate that we were not fully covering our fixed costs, and so we are putting proportionally just a little bit more, recommending that we put a little bit more towards the basic charge. We do anticipate more discussion next year with the board about rate design as we work on a new 3-year COSA.
Okay, so then that leads me into, so we're kind of starting to put COSA into our rate. We're going to have a further conversation on rate design. And what I'm getting to is there's always been the talk about the upriver class. So did upriver class is that going to come in the rate design discussion, or was that embedded in this COSA basic charge costs?
So the upriver group of customers is folded in with our residential and our general service. And so for the purposes of this rate proposal, are commingled. Okay. But we'll be prepared to bring those out again next year and share those results with the board.
Okay. All right, so now I'm going to get into some nitty-gritty. Just so that you know, I read it. You know, what would a budget be if you didn't? So I learned a new term this time, wheeling. And we spent $12 million on wheeling, and I had to look that up, and it was like the 9th thing down on Google. You know, when you start to do wheeling, there's all kinds of things that have nothing to do with power, but I learned that, so that tells you that I read the document. But one question that I did have on this, and it's on page 63 of our packet, and it's the customer service operation and maintenance budgets. The wages and benefits on that one went from 6.9 million to 9.1 million. You know, across all the other classes, it was pretty steady, the rate increase, but this is a 23% increase in wages and benefits. Are we hiring more people in there? What's driving that 23% increase in that specific department?
So yes, we are hiring more individuals. There's a temporary increase in their staffing to help us be prepared for EES and that implementation. So not just that we need more customer service folks answering the phones, but they're also providing for backfill across the company as we open up opportunities. So there are more folks accounted for in that budget than in previous years.
So it's an increase in FTE basically that's driving that above and beyond what everybody else did. Okay.
It's a bump that.
I was going to say this is in that particular department, we're looking at a pretty significant amount of sort of the wave this next year.
Okay. Right. I mean, then just one that when they jumped that bunch, I noticed it. And then lastly, thank you for putting together such a cohesive budget. I guess what I'm going to want as a commissioner with these types of rate increases is hopefully a good communication effort going out to the community to help us justify that. I think we need to reach out to, I mean, obviously our reporter's not in the room, but hopefully he's in his pajamas and is watching and can understand how and why we got to this, and the fact that this is not just us alone doing it. We saw the PGEs going up 17%, we're going up 8%. But we need to be able to tell this story to our residential customers, to our business customers all across the board. And I hope that there is an integrated plan to do that, because I think for so long we weren't raising rates, and now we are. And we have to be able to tell that story, because I don't want to end. I know that we'll get phone calls and we'll hear from our constituents, how come you're raising your rates? And it's really difficult for me to extrapolate that, It's like, well, we've got a bump in customer service because we're integrating, smart meters and stuff like that. That doesn't translate well. So having a cohesive message is going to be a very important part of this for me.
People more talented than me in that aspect are listening in here.
There is a plan, and we've started executing that plan already. There have been a number of bill inserts and newsletters talking about our rates and everything from where your dollar goes to these are some of the changes that we're looking to fund. The interesting thing, and I think it came out last meeting, was the 2024 rate increase is not because the 2024 budget is any different than the 2023 budget. The reason for that is that we are positioning ourselves to make some of these significant infrastructure investments in the near years to come. And so to be able to fund those, be in a good financial position to borrow money at good rates, you have to set yourself up financially to do that. It is not because our 2024 budget is 7% higher than our 2023 budget. But to answer your question, yes, we have a plan and we have a team that's already started working on that.
Yeah, we haven't talked about basic charge for a long time. Last time we did, we got crucified and we lowered. But other utilities like Lane Electric, they're $35 a month. We're 22. And so on our comparator charge, is that just a kilowatt charge?
That is based on a usage level, and we targeted
the base rate.
It does.
So the difference between 22 and 35 between us and Lane Electric is factored in there?
It is factored in there, yes.
Why isn't that base rate ever brought up to us anymore? It hasn't been for, 7 years, 5 years? I know we got pounded on it, but.
Well, this is the whole issue of rate design is that's going to be a big part of the discussion.
Well, the new rate design is raising our base rate.
Yeah, I'll project that there's going to be 3 phases to that. The first one is, I believe, but this has to be discussed, that we need to better align our fixed costs with our variable costs. That's in order to set the baseline to be able to offer some of the future products and services. The second phase will be to create the mechanisms to be able to reward people who can save us on the capacity pieces. So the peak pieces, for example, be able to set this up for time of use rates and things like that. And then the third one is the very specific products and services around demand response and other things that we want. And I expect that to take probably 2 or 3 years to implement, but that will be, when we come back next month and talk about the 2024 goals, rate design will be one of the goals that we want to launch into, including a better alignment between fixed and variable costs.
I had a couple more quick questions about just some of the details in the budgets. 58 of our board packet, which is the water utility operations and maintenance budget and revenue requirements. It says that the production, which I'm assuming that's our sales for water, and correct me if I'm wrong there, that's not what production means, but for 2023 it's 18 million, and then for 2024 it's 11.5. And I'm just curious why there's that big of a change. Is that, it seems like we're raising rates, so it would be higher. The presumed gallons above are fairly close, maybe slightly lower from a residential perspective. And
It's a function of last year's budget, including expenses that were grant funded. So we had grant revenues included in the budget last year that we haven't done this year because those grants haven't yet been awarded.
okay, so that explains why it was around the same amount for 2022, then jumped up and then went back down.
Yes.
Okay. Then on the electric utility operations and maintenance budget and revenue requirements, this is page 56 of our full packet. It's listed as page 8 at the bottom of the regular packet. It says rate funded capital. I just wanted to find out more about that because it was about 19 million for 2023, and it's listed at 32.1 million for 2024. And so is that the pre-funding of these different projects, or is that something else entirely?
Go ahead. Okay. So this is related to pre-funding for Lieber. It's also related to, or not the pre-funding, but for the capital work related to Lieber. It's also related to increasing type 1 work, as well as the software, the EWEB Enterprise Solutions software implementation. And so those are projects that are not bond funded. They need to rates, and so year-over-year you're seeing that increase.
Okay, so this is the amount that we are going to recognize in 2024, and then in addition to that, then there's the deposit to the Lieber reserve down below, which is.
Yeah, so the rate fund is to fund the capital work, but then the reserves comes from the revenue.
Decommissioning and the future work.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
You can follow that rate funded capital line from the bottom of that schedule onto the next page as a funding source for the capital plan. So those numbers actually show up twice, or that line item shows up twice. So
Okay, that was the question. Okay, great. In terms of direction, thank you for your work. And we know that there's a lot that's gone into this. We've had numerous conversations about the kinds of projects that we've approved and what we, how we want to smooth the rates. So thank you for listening to our feedback and presenting us with a budget that does that. That's it. Okay.
Thank you.
just to be clear, I didn't hear any redirection on the materials provided, so you'll see basically the same thing next month. All right. Thank you.
All right, so I still know we do potentially have anybody came in late. We'll just have to keep note of the time at 7:55. Other than that, we have a break. Any objections to that? No. Okay, let's take a break. We will take a 10-minute break and we'll come back at 7:45. Okay, we're gonna call back to order here. And we are up with the PURPA standards, resolution number 2317. And we'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. It's my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Hart, Power Planning Supervisor, and coming in online, I see he's opened up his camera, Aaron Bush, Energy Resource Analyst here at the Eugene Water and Electric Board. Aaron will be providing analysis of the recent Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act, or PURPA, standards relating to demand response and electric vehicle charging programs. He'll shed light on the alignment of these standards with EWEB's strategic direction and the evolving energy landscape, and he'll discuss the implications for utility policies, community equity, and the reliability of our system. This presentation draws from valuable insights gleaned from both our normal rigorous staff analyses, but also the public feedback, which has been substantial. It's been nice that we've gotten from the PURPA process. So please join me in welcoming Aaron Bush as he shares insights on the EWEB's approach to these standards and staff's recommendation.
Okay, thanks Brian, and good to be back with you after a couple months of this. So yeah, happy to move to the next slide. So just wanted to do a very brief agenda for this item. Basically want to review our PURPA process and the timeline that we've had over the past couple months. A quick overview of the public comment that we received, and then dive into the staff analysis and recommendations, and then ultimately we will end up with a board resolution at the end of this item. Next slide. So you should recognize this timeline. We've looked at it for the last couple months. Basically, we started off last September with the resolution to have a new hearings process. So we used that new hearings process. And so open public comment in early September that ran through mid-October. And then also at the October board meeting, we presented on our initial analysis of the appropriateness of the standards for EWEB. And now this month, we're going to talk a bit more about that overview of the public comment that we received, have the final staff analysis and recommendations, and then ask for a board resolution to adopt the staff recommendations. So next slide. And we talked a bit more in depth about PURPA and the standards at the other board meetings, but just wanted to kind of refresh and highlight what the overview of the standards is, right? The goal of the standards is to promote the use of demand response and to promote transportation and electrification. So while there's a lot of nuances about rate design and all these little sub-pieces, the broad purpose of the standards is these two things: promote demand response, promote electrification. Next slide. So jumping on to public comment that we received about 42 comments, and while there was a lot of nuances and different perspectives in those comments, there's two main themes that came out. One is kind of the broad support for the standards came from commenters who basically felt like EWEB should be enabling and facilitating the reductions in community carbon emissions and saw the standards as aligned with that goal. And so supported EWEB adopting the standards to achieve those broader goals. Most of the concerns about the standards were basically about rate impacts to different customer groups and the appropriate use of customer dollars, right, for EV programs and other incentives. And so those are themes that you've seen probably throughout the IOP process and other things throughout EWEB, right? The overall goals and policies that we have as a utility, and then kind of the equity and the treatment of rates in different customer groups. Also just want to recognize that we haven't necessarily heard all the perspectives that are out there. We did have a pretty robust public process, so we had the notice in the Eugene Registered Guard, and then also did a press release and reached out to commenters who participated in the integrated resource plan process. And so through all of that, we did get a fairly good range of perspectives, but we also know that some of the more vulnerable or disadvantaged communities tend to not participate in these public processes, and so we might not have heard their perspective at this point. Next slide. So moving on to some of the public comment for the electric vehicle charging standard. So the support for the standard, a lot of that support came from customers who already own electric vehicles and have experienced the need for better charging infrastructure. And so they supported the standard as a means to accomplish that. They also saw the standard as aligned with the broad goals of reducing carbon emissions. And then in general, similarly, they wanted to kind of increase access for everyone to have infrastructure for charging electric vehicles to accomplish those goals. So that broad support is people who see the need for charging infrastructure and want to reduce carbon emissions. If you would hit next. A lot of the opposition basically came from commenters who believed that EVs already receive a lot of subsidies, and then it's not UWEB's role to provide further subsidies for electric vehicles or incentives for electric vehicles, and felt that that just wasn't the right place. Next. And similarly, some of the concerns that commenters expressed were basically about cost shifts between customer groups. And so they're worried that, hey, if EWEB is incentivizing providing funds for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, those need to come from somewhere, and they were concerned that those dollars would come from other ratepayers who wouldn't necessarily benefit from that charging infrastructure. Next slide. So moving on to the demand response standard, the broad themes from public comment was that those who supported the standard saw demand response as a way to integrate renewables more effectively and again reduce carbon emissions. A lot of the same commenters who supported the EV standard liked the demand response standard because they saw it really meeting the way that electric vehicles could be used to charge more efficiently. There are also several commenters that had experienced time of use rates or demand response rates in other service territories and actually found it to be a positive experience and thought it would be something that would be beneficial for UWEB. Next. So similarly, the opposition came from commenters who were concerned about cost shifts to customers who couldn't shift their consumption patterns, right? So they basically saw this as penalizing customers for using energy when they would need it most, and they weren't necessarily able to shift those costs. Next. And similar concerns on the cost shifts impacts the vulnerable populations who might not have access to demand response ready technologies, and again, wouldn't be able to participate in programs or shift their loads, and so might be negatively impacted and end up paying more. Next slide. So the overview, there's a lot more detail in the staff analysis and recommendation document itself. But broadly, right, the commenters raised some pretty valid considerations, both in support of the standards and some concerns that they raised about the potential for rate impacts or the way that ratepayer dollars are used. And in general, right, those are things that we consider all the time as a publicly owned utility, right? So these are the types of considerations that we need to balance going forwards. And the broad response that we have is that, right, moving forwards, as we would implement standards or do anything with rate design, we would incorporate, right, utility values, those potentials for cross subsidies across rate classes, and also our adopted policies like the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy or our carbon policies into future decision making. And so we recognize the validity of their concerns and want to be cognizant of those as we're moving forwards. Just also wanted to note that this is in some of the deeper analysis, but the current funding for the EV programs that we have comes from the Oregon Clean Fuels program. So all of that funding is basically generated by EV owners charging in our service territory. And so because that funding is coming from EV owners going to EV owners, it's not creating cross subsidies between groups. And EWEB also already has, thinking about the accessibility part of the standard, we have programs that are intended to provide accessibility for rideshare programs and e-bikes and things like that that are a little bit more accessible to the general population. Next slide. So that was the kind of overview of the public comment. Again, you've received the whole list of public comment. If you managed to make it through all of those, there's also more analysis in the staff recommendation. but really wanted to talk about like the format of the recommendation itself. There's basically three main areas. So the appropriateness of the standard, right? Is it appropriate for EWEB and is it appropriate for PURPA? Implementation, so if the standard is appropriate for us, how would we actually implement it? And then what are some clarifications that we would need, right? So the standard is kind of written for everyone, but what do we need to say about the standard to make it right for us? So as we think about the staff recommendation overall, that's what's going to be the three main things to think about how we would actually implement and whether it's appropriate for us. Next slide. So the recommendation on the EV standard broken into those three main categories. So the appropriateness, as we talked about last month, the standard is broadly appropriate to carry out purposes, so more efficient use of our resources. And the standard is aligned with our strategic direction, right? Our support for CAP 2.0 and broader community carbon reduction goals and our own internal carbon policy. So it's broadly appropriate for EWEB and for PURPA. And so for implementation, basically the implementation is, hey, we're already doing this. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. And moving forwards, in any decisions that we would make, we would apply our already adopted policies around carbon or DEI and our utility values to those decisions. And for a clarification, there's many more clarifications listed in the recommendations document, but the kind of overview clarification is this: we can change direction in the future, right? We have the right to alter our EV programs and incentives depending on our different needs in the future. So, broad overview for the EV standard is that it's appropriate. We would take basically continue what we're doing to implement and reserve the right to change direction if we need to in the future. Next slide. So for the demand response standard, similar to the EV standard, we talked about this last month. It's broadly appropriate to carry out purposes, right? More efficient use of resources. The standard's aligned with EWEB strategic direction, right? It came out as a selected resource in the Integrated Resource Plan as part of our action plan. Frank just mentioned some things where we're kind of moving in that direction. So it's aligned with where we're headed, and it's appropriate to carry out purposes, so it's broadly appropriate. To implement, right, we can't implement it yet because we're not there yet with all of the technology. So for us, the implementation is more about continuing to do the demand response potential assessment that we called for in the IRP action plan. Continue with the billing systems updates that we need to do and make sure that those are demand response ready, and continue with the advanced metering and rollout. And so going forwards, right, just as with the EV programs, there's going to be a lot of different considerations in how we actually design and implement demand response programs. And so we would apply all of our adopted policies to those programs, right? Our utility values, considerations of impacts of different customer groups, things like that. And for the clarifications, just as with the EV standard, if we get through all of this, we do some pilot programs, we test things out, and it turns out it's not working, it's not right for us, again, can change direction as needed. So we're not locking ourselves into a path here. We can make it right for the utility. So next slide. So before I talk about the board resolution itself, just want to kind of call back to the overview of PURPA for EWEB. Right, the requirements for us was to have this hearings process, which we did. We actually had a pretty robust hearings process. We've solicited public comment and incorporated that into our thinking and analysis about the standards. And so in that sense, we're kind of fulfilling our duties under PURPA. And then also just wanted to note that we are, oh, sorry, lost my train of thought there. Yeah, we'd like to basically say that everything is aligned with our strategic direction, right? So we're not calling for things in the implementation of the standard that we're not kind of moving towards already and that we don't see kind of in the broad future for the region for EWEB. And so there's nothing in this that's kind of like we're moving that way when actually we should be moving this way. We're kind of, everything is designed to roll in the direction that we're already moving. And so part of this is kind of it's an official kind of signal saying, hey, we're headed in this direction. So For overall, the staff would recommend the motion to approve the resolution 2317, adopting the staff analysis and recommendation. So happy to take questions. I think John and Brian might be able to answer some things. It's more fluid how the conversation in the room, but I'm also happy to answer.
All right, thank you, Aaron.
All right, John.
Yeah. All right. Just a technical question, because you say that EWEB's funding for the EV programs incentives comes from Oil Clean Fuels, which is generated when EV owners in EWEB service territory charge their cars. How do you know when I'm charging my car?
So, the way the program works is the state of Oregon has a general sense for where EVs are registered, and so they have a deemed amount of credits that are produced per EV based on their own internal analysis. They attribute, based on registration of vehicles, where those, which service territories those EVs likely reside within.
So it's just a registration thing, it's not a consumption thing, and so my EV sits in the driveway for 6 months, you're still getting money?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Because I agree with everything you're doing here, but we just passed rates and things, and this is gonna cost money. How is this gonna be funded?
So part of the standard says that we would say that our EV carrier programs would be cost-based. I realize that.
You're talking about us putting in the charger?
I don't think so.
We're just selling electricity. I mean, we sell it for 9 or 10 cents a kilowatt. You charge 29 cents for a supercharger.
Yeah. Which I can vouch is largely capital. It's a $100,000 piece of equipment for renewable electricity. It's the vast majority of what you pay for charging is just to make the supercharger. And it's still a cost-based rate.
The implementation of PURPA, these two standards, EV and demand response, will be funded how?
So in terms of the electric vehicle portion, our electric vehicle programs, which align with the standards that we talk about here, are largely being funded through revenue that is generated through the sales of these clean fuel credits. And the state of Oregon has deemed that EWEB is generating a certain amount of those credits that are available to us for free, and that we are, through the free market and the revenue associated with the sale of those credits are to be used towards these purposes. To my knowledge, the programs are revenue neutral because they're using those revenue dollars from the sales of those credits as the funding source.
Great answer.
That's what I was going to say, that EV is going to be revenue neutral, at least in its initial implementation, and then the demand response will be part of our work around, that's a cost avoidance that will actually create value for the organization, and we'll have to have discussions around how that value is shared with the individual who creates it and the utility as a whole. So it's actually going to provide value to the organization.
I'm just curious, so when we started talking about the PURPA standards, these were standards that seemed to be in the books and were not brought, I mean, were not changed for decades. And we're bringing them up so that they're more relevant and in compliance, but it was still my understanding that the policies and the programs behind them are remaining unchanged. I mean, if we vote this in, pass this resolution, not changing our current programs, it's just developing the current programs and kind of the trajectory that we've already outlined to accommodate that. So really, if we vote yes on this, it's not like tomorrow we have demand response. I mean, this is, we have a series of a setup saying that we could do this in the future, but it's not actually changing anything tomorrow.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
We felt that that everything EWEB is already doing a lot very well.
I want to be crystal clear on that.
I just want to comment on one of the things that people complained about with EVs. They were concerned about us subsidizing EVs, and I just want to say, we used to subsidize the purchase of EVs. We did, but then we changed it because we thought that we didn't want to do that anymore. And instead, we do subsidize putting in chargers in home because that more directly relates to what it is that we're doing with electricity. So I just want to say that. And then, yeah, with the demand response, we don't have the capability right now to do demand response the way that we want to, but that is on the docket for what we're going to explore next. So this just seems very in line with what we're doing.
To be clear, so the charger program that we have is one of our programs, which is funded with this same pool of funds that we're getting through the sales of these credits. And so, so that is where those funds come.
Yeah, but we're not subsidizing the purchase of them. No, we used to.
We did at one time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Frank and then Borowski.
Just a quick thing on those clean fuel credits funds. We actually have to account for those. The purpose of those is to facilitate and go back into things related to electric mobility. And so we couldn't just be taking those and sending them off into some general fund that the other part of the utility uses. Just so people know, there is an obligation to use this for electric vehicle types of things.
Okay, Bro.
Great. Yeah, I'm all on board with this, moving forward with the resolution. The thing that I was really encouraged about was the amount of public input that we got. It was outstanding, I mean, a lot of the people referenced the article in the Register Guard, which, again, where's my friend from the Register Guard? But I guess the other question that I would have is, a lot of times on public input, there would be an advocacy group that's pushing it. Did you notice if this I mean, I read the story in the Register Guard and I'm giving input. Do you feel that a percentage of this was advocacy generated, or, you know, like a newsletter went out to a specific advocate, or was this just a really well designed public outreach?
I don't know if John, I can answer. If Aaron O isn't in the room, Aaron O is our communication specialist. You can thank Aaron O for everything that we get public feedback on. So he did a press release, and I think that was the thing that garnered the most feedback. So we kind of did the standard boilerplate, like, hey, here's a notice, but it's actually the press release and kind of releasing that. We also connected with some of the folks who commented on the integrated resource plan, and we know that several specific groups, advocacy groups, were involved in that. So we know that that specifically did reach kind of people who are associated with advocacy groups. I would say that in general, kind of to the comments earlier, you know, I'm on the integrated resource plan team as well, and I think we're just broadly seeing that the effort that EWEB puts into outreach and soliciting feedback is pretty impactful on the comments that we get. And so being cognizant of that in the future and figuring out how we can reach different groups. We're kind of thinking about that in the back of our minds as well, especially for the next go around on the IRP and how we engage.
Yeah, I mean, I was really stunned by, one, that we got that many responses, and two, that they were as varied. Again, I do think that it was skewed by a lot of people who have EVs or know about EVs or are engaged in that conversation. And so that's the one area that I show a little bit of concern about, is that we weren't hearing from the people that don't have an EV or won't, you know, don't see themselves in that market. And again, but you addressed that in your comments, that we know that there's a population out there that we aren't hearing from on certain issues, but I think that this shows that we're really getting out to a lot more people than a lot of agencies that I've seen. So good work on that.
For both for both standards, we did receive, constructive feedback around, rate design and cross-subsidization and stuff like that. So I think you're right in describing that we have very good responses, which was really helpful.
Okay.
Can I have a motion?
Please.
I move to approve Resolution 2317, adopting the staff analysis and recommendation on PURPA's demand response and electric vehicle charging standard.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, it passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Ready?
Okay, quarterly and operational strategic goals report for 23.
President Carlson, do you want to see if, did we check to see if anybody?
I asked Dan, yeah, if there was anybody. Okay.
Ooh, you got a shiny object. And don't be distracted by the shiny object. President Carlson, Commissioners, good evening. Frank Lawson for the record, General Manager. Wanted to take the opportunity to review a few of the highlights from the last quarter. You did receive a 79-page quarterly report. I guarantee it's entirely accurate and transparent, as much as we can with all that data coming at us. But appreciate the staff work that goes into putting that together. A few of the highlights, and I am going to start with the shiny object here, because I want to talk about our EES system, EWEB Enterprise Solutions. We've really passed a major milestone, moving from what's termed the imagine phase to the build phase. And the imagine phase isn't just, oh, here's some ideas of what we want to do. What goes into that is a complete look at our processes, the documentation, the process maps, how work flows throughout our utility. And we have a lot of processes, and we process millions of transactions. And so to be able to go back, go through that process, and then imagine the imagine piece is where you have to now map those processes into a new system. And our goal has always been to make that system as standardized as possible, to do the least amount of customization as we can. And we have so far been able to do that and really leverage the technology there. We did receive an award for this from SAP, who's our software sort of suite supplier. It's the Innovation and Vision Award for our forward-thinking approach to this project, and moving from a location-based server to now a cloud-based system, and how we're approaching that. EWEB is the first mid-sized utility to ever win this. Usually it's given to a number of larger utilities, but we were the first to do that. And it's really our commitment to the journey, to working with our partners, including SAP and Deloitte and some others on this. And so we know there's a lot of work left to be done, but we wanted to share and appreciate the team and all the work that they've done on this so far. To give you a little bit of flavor, there's approximately at any one time at least 30 employees working on this project. Next year, we talked about the bubble that we're going to see in some FTEs. Between roughly April and November, we will have likely 70 people working on this project and testing all of the different components of this project. It's incredibly important, and it's really foundational to a lot of the work we want to do. It's going well, very deliberate, significant progress, and we want to celebrate that, but we also want to look forward with eyes wide open and say there's still a lot to come. So anyway, that's the shiny object, and And Deborah and Travis and Julie, who are executive sponsors, thank you, and thank you to the team and to all the change management and all the other things that have to go into that. So thank you. A couple of the other highlights, we are on year to date, our financial performance is good. We will likely, want to give you a heads up that we will likely need to come before the board next month with a budget amendment on the water side. This is particular to capital. It's really around timing of some of the projects being sooner. We've been able to progress on some of those sooner rather than later. They're all in the 5-year plan. It's just when you get near the end of the year, whether they fall this year or next year. So we'll likely be back, or rather Deborah will be back in front of you with a request for a budget amendment on the water capital side. One of the highlights in the quarter from a energy efficiency perspective was that we petitioned and secured additional funding from Bonneville, an additional $3.3 million to assist with additional energy efficiency. We had those projects in the works, which was something that EWEB was wise to do. Where that funding comes from is EWEB or BPA has a budget for their energy efficiency. It's actually paid for initially by customers like EWEB. It's then allocated out to different utilities, and not all utilities meet their targets. And so when Bonneville reaches the end of the year, any additional funds are potentially available to other utilities, and we took advantage of that this year, and we're able to fund another $3.3 million worth of incentives to customers for energy efficiency work. We're about 57% of our way toward our annual goal. That annual goal is a little higher than normal. That's because in the past it was driven by the IRP, which was to offset growth. It's pretty close to our historic average of around 10,000 megawatt hours per month based on our rate for the year, but it's a little behind where we wanted to be from an annual perspective this year. From a major projects perspective, East 40th looks like it's on schedule and on budget. We wanted to get that commissioned by the end of the year. It looks like that's going to happen. There will be some work that flows into next year around backfilling and some of the work around the tanks, but the thought is now it'll be commissioned and it's on schedule and on budget. Carmen Smith, we did in September, in the quarter, staff did provide the board with a pretty detailed update on that. There are some projects that are on schedule and completed, and there's a few that are not. I think that the board is aware of what those are. I won't elaborate too much on that. But Carmen Smith is a large project. It's a multi-year project, and the board has secured the funding and has planned for the funding for that project for a number of years going forward. And then AMI, Advanced Infrastructure, we will begin the continued mass deployment in early 2024. And that is something where throughout this last phase, at some point, we will be replacing all analog meters with digital meters. Even if they decide to opt out, it'll be with a digital meter. It won't be with an analog meter at some point. Finally, I wanted to just celebrate a few of the board actions that were taken in the quarter. There were really, I think, 3 that were the most significant. 2 board policies that you worked on throughout the year. A resiliency policy that was initially launched in 2022, and then a DEI policy, diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, which I think was actually originally talked about the year before when we were talking about rate equity, and worked throughout the year, and those were both passed by the board in the third quarter. And the actions that support those you'll start to see come up when we start talking about next year's goals and action plans. And then you approved or adopted the integrated resource plan also throughout the quarter. So thank you to the board for a number of key milestones throughout the quarter. Some goal updates. We do have some goal updates as we progress. Most of them are in the green. Some of them that are in the yellow are in process. In the data management plan that we will be developing and finishing up some of the scope, that's more like a 2024 implementation. It's somewhat coupled with the EES project, but we have developed the charter and are working on a refined scope. That includes things like storage and security, really how you manage your data and all aspects of it, really proactively, and it's not just through the enterprise system, but it's all data, for example, meter data and other things. So that's a pretty all-inclusive project. And then there's a couple things in the workforce environment that we're continuing to evolve and look at hybrid work, for example, and how we want to structure that, as well as integrating some of the feedback that we've received through our employee engagement survey and implementing some of those. And so the dark green means it's been completed, and then the light green, it's on track, and the yellow, there are some issues that we're trying to navigate and mitigate. And in some cases, some of that will get pushed off to 2024. The other goals, I think you're pretty well aware of these. The EES I just talked about. Again, some major milestones accomplished there, launching into some other phases. Integrated resource plan. The actions that came out of that, you will see being implemented over the next couple of years. The second drinking water source, we are in the permitting. We wanted to get all the local permits taken care of in early 2024, and so that we could submit for any federal permits in that time as well, sort of do our submittal for the federal permits in the first half of 2024. And then the decommissioning action plan, there will be a public meeting on that and the direction that we're going to go there, the first board meeting in January. So you have lots of staff around. There's lots of details, as you can imagine, that go into this, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. I don't know if you did notice this, but we've been working on really continuous improvement for this report. There's a lot of new and different graphics that were included. Some of the charts maybe have looked a little bit different. We're continuing to evolve that and continuing to look for what is the most meaningful data that we can present. So I really appreciate staff's work on that, and we'll continue to evolve this as we go forward. I'll turn it back to you, President Carlson.
All right. Questions?
I'll start this time.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
On the second treatment plant, the PSFP process, is that being slowed down through government agencies, or is it has there been an appeal, or what's the process with getting the Metro Plan amended to do that?
It's my understanding it's not an appeal,
okay.
That it's just the government process. Is that correct?
And if so, which there's three partners. There's Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County that all have to sign off on a Metro Plan amendment. So who's not stepping up of those three partners?
It hasn't gotten to that stage yet. It's actually in the authoring.
Okay.
And LCOG is also helping to participate in that. So it has not actually gone to those agencies.
Okay, so you're still developing the verbiage to present to the legislative bodies.
That's correct, and we're expecting that actually in the first quarter of 2024.
Thank you.
You give us some minutia, so for a reason, so I read it. So in July, there was two contracts a week apart for the same company. both to remove trees, one for $46,000 and one for $99,900, but the same company, only for a month. That just doesn't sound right. I mean, they're both up at Carmen, and if you do the math, that's like $4,500, $4,000 a day, every day for a month. And can you just look into that and see what that was about? Because we're spending a ton of money cutting some trees, and that's some pretty merciful timber. I just wonder why we would spend that kind of money, and $99,900 kind of rings a bell for me. Why, that's a contract, is that specific amount for tree falling?
Yeah, there's no magical $100,000 limit.
No, I'm
by the way, on those contracts. We can look into that. There's usually when you have two contracts, there's multiple purposes, even though it may be the same organization, but
same company, same function of cutting trees at Carmen. That's small stuff.
We can look into that.
And do we have any issues with on our property that John was just referring to, where the second source is? Are we all good on that? We settled with Sub and everybody else, and we required everything we need to do?
No, we have not gotten everything we need to do. Some of those are the permitting issues that we're in the process of right now. We do have, because of the land issues that you're referring to, because of substation, all of those land issues, the easements and all that has been taken care of. That's all behind us. But the actual land use and zoning and permitting issues are in front of us. Okay. And some of that contingent on the public facility services plan and other things. So.
Okay, thank you.
A small comment on something that you made about AMI deployment and that everybody will be getting into the meter. Just to communicate what that is, and if you opt out, don't think that they're getting it.
Yeah, we're in. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
That communication will start pretty soon. And so as we go, there's areas where there's not meters, so all the meters will be replaced in that area. And then where there's opt-out legacy meters, we'll go back towards the deployment and start deploying those. We'll work with the communication team, which has messages set up on that.
Yeah, as always, appreciate these quarterly reports. That's really helpful to get a glance of all the moving parts, and I can appreciate how much work goes into summarizing all the data. So thank you to everybody involved in helping put this together. And I appreciate the chart on energy efficiency to understand where we are there. I also appreciate there's a note on building electrification to help us understand how many buildings are shifting to electricity. It's interesting to look at that number, and I will just raise again, I think it'd be valuable for us to have a target around that, just because I think there's opportunities there for the utility. That may be the
I'm curious, on the drinking water treatment plant, I noticed on the headline it's got federal permitting. Do we have to work with?
We do have to work, yes, we do have to work with some of the same agencies that we have to work on other things such as licenses.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
The relationships with those agencies are important for a number of reasons.
Okay. That's what I had. Anybody else? We're good. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. The next one of these will be the annual report, and we will be doing some deeper dives into some areas on an annual basis. And so we'll be working with staff between now and the end of the year to be able to bring you back even more information on an annual basis. That one's usually a little bit more of a long-term snapshot, and so expect a little bit more from the early part of next year.
Congrats to staff. And
yes.
Worked on this.
Yes, this is actually really heavy.
How much should we pay for this?
25 million?
And we got
Counselors or something, have custody. Future board agendas. We're going to switch positions.
Yep, I am positions.
Back to the desk for this one.
Yes. So just a couple of things really of noteworthiness here, Commissioners. One of them is that we have moved the Lieberg decommissioning action plan from December to January, and so we'll be working with the communications team to make sure that the public, especially the upriver public, is aware that that discussion will take place in January and not December. Other than that, let's I don't have any additional comments. I think that I really appreciate staff, in particular Ann and Holly, who have taken what was the board agenda report before and really developed, I think, a good cadence on a lot of these items. You can look ahead and see that there's recurring things that we do throughout the year, whether it be looking at the state of the watershed or certain customer confidence reports, or we do have a dam safety report that we're required to do annually. And so that's coming up in December. And so, and then this is financial season, obviously for Deborah Hart and her staff. And so really appreciate their work to develop this cadence. And so as commissioners go through this too, if there's things that you would like to see on a recurring basis, we do a capital review, we do a lot of things, but I think that's where obviously working through the board president would be something that we'd like to make sure we're getting covered. And so I think it really gives you a good snapshot of what's ahead.
Oh, perhaps.
It was brought to our attention in an email earlier that the January meeting is on January 2nd.
Oh, yep, I was going to ask that on the board.
Okay. I saw agendas and stuff like that, so we want to postpone that for a week since it's the day after. I mean, there may be a football game.
You anticipate a headache or what?
No, I was just thinking that there might be people who holiday at that time of year when they get paid holidays off. A lot of times.
What day of the week is it?
It's a Tuesday.
The first is a Monday, so.
I could care less. I mean,
Well,
First, I don't
our
care.
staff are not working on the first, though, right? Because, so if we're submitting questions, then staff have to deal with the questions on that time, or Frank.
There might be a national football championship game that coincides with that weekend that people might
It's
go.
a travel weekend then, isn't it? Yeah, we'll have a board meeting where the game is.
How burdensome is it to change for a week?
At this time, it doesn't matter to us. I mean,
I'm sorry, I thought there's something in the bylaws, we had to convene the first week of something about for election of officers or doing something.
Well, we don't have any new elected officers this time around, and I think that policy also says that we can change it if we need to. So from a staff perspective, it's not difficult to change.
I would, for me, I would say let's push it back a week.
I agree.
I agree.
Thank you.
I'll just clear it with Ann and Holly. Any issues with pushing it back 1 week?
I don't think so. We can make sure that the room's available, but I think you all take priorities. We're good.
Can't tell me who's going to kick us out.
I wouldn't want to try.
I guess let it be done then.
guess we'll move on to board wrap up. I did have a question. We were asked about the practice for how we evaluate the board. And, you know, typically in the past, we've had a questionnaire and we get together after that and have an opportunity to say if there's anything that we need to adjust. But do you all agree with that process? Have any thoughts on changing it? If you don't have thoughts in this late hour at 8:30, just let us know if you have any thoughts. But,
I'll just say that by policy, the board needs to do a self-evaluation on an annual basis. It doesn't say anything about how or why or when. The last few years, we've sent a survey out to commissioners. We compile that, provide that to you, and in many cases, it gives you something to discuss or not during a retreat. And so it's mandated that you do it, but there's no stipulation around what you actually do. But that's historically worked fine for us, and it gives us a little information as well.
well, anyone ends up having thoughts?
Oh, yes, I may have spoke too soon. There is a training happening in this room every day that second week of January, so I'll just need to coordinate. I don't know if that involves outside parties or not.
Does it happen at night?
It's 8 to 5, so more to come. I'll get back to you right away.
We'll plan on the night.
Okay.
Executive session.
Maybe we can borrow City Hall.
Go to the old building.
All right, okay, anything else? Nope.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is possible, but for me, when the board agenda goes out, if it would be possible to put the page number so like when we have the budget, right? We can look and say the budget starts on page 230 or 231 or whatever. Because I'm flipping back and forth in here and then it's like, okay, well, where's the budget? And I have to scroll down.
Just do a word search.
Or if they could just say that the budget the public hearing, item number 10 starts on page this in our packet, would really be helpful to me. I don't know if that's cumbersome. If it is, then forget about it. But if each one of these numbers, you could say what page in the packet that starts, so that when I'm going back and forth between these things, if I could just punch in page here, I know that I'm jumping to that rather than scrolling down. That would be helpful for me.
We'll explore some ideas. There may be a way to do it with separate documents also.
Just
that allow you to navigate it a little. We'll talk about it and see.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, thanks everyone. Meeting adjourned.
And then there's this